What if the first robots were not built in Silicon Valley, but in the ancient world thousands of years before electricity even existed? It sounds impossible. We're taught that robotics, autonomous machines, and advanced engineering belong to the modern era, an age of microchips, algorithms, and artificial intelligence. But history tells a far stranger story. Buried in forgotten manuscripts, preserved in ancient engineering texts, and occasionally rediscovered by stunned archaeologists are descriptions of machines that should not exist in their time. A wooden bird powered by steam that flew hundreds of feet through the air in ancient Greece. A mechanical woman in Alexandria that could pour wine for guests with perfect etiquette, automatically mixing it with water like a programmed bartender. A bronze device in Imperial China capable of detecting earthquakes over 300 miles away, long before seismology was even imagined. A navigation machine that could guide entire armies through dense fog without using a compass. And finally, in a royal palace in Renaissance Spain, a small mechanical monk that could walk, move its lips in prayer, and perform gestures of devotion like a living human being. These were not myths, and they were not magic. They were real machines designed by engineers who understood physics so well that they managed to build autonomous mechanisms centuries, sometimes millennia, ahead of their time. Tonight, we're going to investigate 5 of the most astonishing technological artifacts ever recorded in history inventions that challenge our understanding of the past and force us to confront a deeply unsettling possibility. The age of robotics may not have begun in the modern world at all. It may have begun thousands of years ago. For most of us, technology follows a simple timeline. Primitive tools in the distant past, sophisticated machines in the modern age. The story seems obvious, humanity slowly climbing from stone axes to satellites. But the deeper historians dig into the records of ancient civilizations, the more that neat narrative begins to crack. Because scattered across different cultures and centuries are traces of something far more unsettling: machines that behaved in ways no one expects from the ancient world. Devices that moved on their own, mechanisms that responded to physical input and produced precise outcomes, systems that sensed invisible forces and translated them into mechanical action. These were not toys or curiosities. They were carefully engineered constructions designed by people who understood physics, balance, pressure, and motion with remarkable sophistication. What makes these discoveries so striking is not just the technology itself, but the mindset behind it. Ancient engineers were not merely crafting tools, they were experimenting with the idea that a machine could imitate life, perform tasks automatically, and even interact with the environment. In other words, they were exploring the very foundations of robotics long before the word robot was ever invented. When we begin to look closely at the historical evidence, an uncomfortable realization emerges. The modern technological revolution may not represent the birth of automation, but rather the rediscovery of ideas that brilliant minds had already imagined thousands of years ago. Nearly 24 centuries ago, in the Greek city of Tarentum, something happened that must have looked like a miracle to everyone who witnessed it. The crowd gathered in the open square, expecting another lecture from the brilliant philosopher and mathematician Archytas. Instead, they found a strange wooden apparatus placed at the center of the plaza. Attached to it was a carefully carved wooden pigeon, roughly the size of a real bird. Its wings were fixed in place, motionless, giving no hint of what was about to occur. Archytas quietly lit a fire beneath the device, and for several minutes, nothing happened. The spectators began to murmur. Then suddenly the wooden bird trembled. A sharp hiss burst from its tail, and before the crowd could even react, the pigeon shot forward into the air. It did not simply fall or glide. It flew, cutting through the air for nearly 650 feet before finally losing its momentum. To people living in the ancient world, this moment defied every known rule of nature. Rumors spread instantly that Archytas had harnessed some supernatural force, perhaps trapping a wind spirit inside the hollow bird. Others insisted there must have been invisible strings guiding its movement. But the truth was far more extraordinary than superstition. Inside the wooden pigeon was a sealed chamber connected to a small boiler. As water heated, steam pressure built rapidly within the cavity. When released through a narrow nozzle at the rear of the bird, the escaping steam generated powerful reactive thrust, pushing the pigeon forward through the air. Without realizing it, Archytas had demonstrated one of the fundamental principles of jet propulsion. More than 2,000 years before airplanes filled the skies, This Greek philosopher had already proven that a machine could propel itself through the air, using nothing but physics ingenuity and an audacious imagination. Several centuries after the astonishing experiment of Archytas, another mechanical marvel emerged, this time in one of the most brilliant intellectual centers of the ancient world, Alexandria. During the 2nd century, BC, Alexandria was a city where wealth, science, and imagination collided. Scholars gathered in its libraries, engineers experimented with mechanics and hydraulics, and wealthy elites competed to display their power and sophistication. It was during one lavish banquet, illuminated by the warm flicker of hundreds of oil lamps, that guests were introduced to something that would leave many of them deeply unsettled. Standing quietly on a raised platform was a life-sized statue of a young woman. Her face had been carved from smooth, polished wood, delicate and serene, while her body was covered in thin plates of shining metal that reflected the golden light of the room. In her right hand, she held an elegant pitcher. At first, the figure appeared to be nothing more than decoration. But when a guest approached and carefully placed an empty cup into the statue's outstretched hand, the impossible happened. The mechanical woman slowly came to life. Her arm moved with surprising grace, tilting the pitcher forward as a stream of dark wine poured into the cup. The room fell silent, yet the spectacle was not finished. When the cup reached exactly half full, the statue paused for a brief moment before continuing to pour, this time filling the remainder with water, perfectly following the etiquette of Greek banquets, where wine was traditionally diluted. When the guest removed the cup, the figure returned to stillness as if nothing had happened. Many observers were convinced something supernatural must be hidden within the statue. Some whispered about spirits trapped inside the metal shell. Others suspected a servant concealed within the body pulling invisible strings. But the truth was a masterpiece of engineering designed by the inventor Philo of Byzantium. Inside the statue were sealed reservoirs connected by valves and levers. The weight of the cup triggered a mechanism that used air pressure to push wine first, then water through the pitcher. In essence, Philo had created a programmed machine, an elegant mechanical servant, performing a sequence of actions automatically nearly 2,000 years before the concept of automation would be formally understood. In the year 132 AD, inside the vast ceremonial hall of the Han Dynasty imperial court, a device appeared that seemed less like an instrument and more like a message from the future. The machine was enormous, a bronze vessel nearly 6 feet in diameter, its surface decorated with 8 intricately sculpted dragon heads, each facing a different direction of the compass. Beneath every dragon sat a bronze toad with its mouth open, as if patiently waiting to receive something. Inside each dragon's mouth rested a small bronze ball. To the casual observer, it looked ceremonial, perhaps symbolic, another elaborate object designed to impress the emperor. But the man who built it, the astronomer and engineer Zhang Heng, knew it was something far more extraordinary. One quiet day, as court officials conducted their routine affairs, the stillness of the hall was suddenly shattered by the sharp metallic clang of falling bronze. One of the balls had dropped from a dragon's mouth and landed squarely inside the waiting toad below. The entire court froze. There had been no tremor, no shaking of the ground. The palace lanterns hung perfectly still. Yet Zhang Heng calmly stepped forward and made a bold declaration: an earthquake had just occurred far to the northwest. The claim seemed impossible, even absurd, but several days later exhausted messengers arrived from a distant province more than 300 miles away. With devastating news, an earthquake had indeed struck, destroying villages and shaking mountains. Zhang Heng's mysterious device had sensed it long before anyone in the capital could feel a single vibration. Hidden inside the bronze vessel was a delicately balanced pendulum suspended within a complex system of levers. When seismic waves traveled invisibly through the earth, even from hundreds of miles away, the inertia of the pendulum caused it to shift ever so slightly. That movement triggered a mechanism that released the ball from the dragon facing the direction of the quake. Without electricity, without modern sensors, Zhang Heng had created the world's first seismograph, a machine capable of listening to the hidden movements of the planet itself. Imagine an army marching across the vast plains of ancient China during the chaotic era historians now call the Three Kingdoms period. Tens of thousands of soldiers move slowly across unfamiliar land, their armor clattering softly as horses pull supply wagons through dust and mud. Suddenly the weather shifts. A thick wall of fog rolls across the landscape, swallowing the horizon. Within minutes, the world becomes a blank white void. The sun disappears, the mountains vanish, and even the soldier walking 10 feet ahead becomes a fading silhouette. For most armies in history, this kind of disorientation meant disaster. Without the stars, the sun, or familiar landmarks, entire armies could wander in circles for days, slowly exhausting their food and strength before an enemy strike. But at the front of this Chinese army rolled a strange vehicle, unlike anything their enemies had ever seen. Mounted on top of the chariot stood a small wooden figure dressed like a nobleman, its arm extended firmly outward. And no matter how sharply the chariot turned left, right across rough ground or twisting paths, the wooden figure's arm never wavered. It continued to point in the same direction south. Enemy scouts observing from a distance were terrified by what they saw. Rumors spread that the statue contained a guiding spirit or ancestral soul leading the army through the mist. Yet inside the chariot there was no magic at all, only brilliant engineering. Hidden beneath its wooden frame was a sophisticated system of interlocking gears connected to the wheels. Whenever the chariot turned, the two wheels rotated at different speeds. The gear mechanism calculated that difference and automatically rotated the statue in the opposite direction by the exact same angle. The result was astonishing. No matter how the vehicle moved, the figure maintained its original orientation. This invention, known as the South-Pointing Chariot, functioned as a purely mechanical navigation system, using the same fundamental principle of differential gearing that modern automobiles rely on today. Centuries before compasses became common tools, Chinese engineers had already built a machine capable of preserving direction through nothing but mathematics and gears. By the mid-16th century, Europe had entered the Renaissance, an era celebrated for art science and the rebirth of knowledge. Yet even in this age of discovery, what happened inside the royal court of Spain felt almost impossible. King Philip II faced a personal tragedy when his son, Prince Don Carlos, suffered a severe head injury that quickly turned into a life-threatening infection. Physicians from across Europe tried desperately to save him, but hope seemed to fade with each passing day. In despair, the king made a solemn vow: if his son survived, he would dedicate an extraordinary act of devotion in gratitude. Against all expectations, the prince recovered. Determined to honor his promise, Philip ordered his brilliant court engineer, Juanelo Turiano, to create something that would symbolize faith, humility, and miracle. Months later, the palace doors opened to reveal a small figure walking slowly across the stone floor. It stood barely 16 inches tall, a wooden monk dressed in a simple brown robe. At first, it appeared to be a toy, but then the figure began to move with eerie purpose. Step by step, it walked forward, shifting its weight from one foot to the other. As it moved, the monk raised a tiny crucifix, struck its chest in a gesture of prayer, and silently moved its lips as though whispering a sacred devotion. Courtiers watching the scene felt a wave of unease ripple through the room. Some crossed themselves in fear, convinced that the machine must contain a trapped soul or some forbidden magic. Yet hidden beneath the robe was nothing supernatural, only astonishing craftsmanship. A tightly wound spring powered a dense system of gears and rotating cams, each one triggering precise movements in sequence. Through pure mechanical logic, Turiano had recreated the illusion of life itself, building one of the earliest autonomous humanoid automatons ever seen in Europe. When these inventions are viewed separately, each one feels like an isolated curiosity, a strange machine built by an unusually gifted mind. But when we place them side by side across history, a far more profound pattern begins to emerge. A steam-powered flying machine in ancient Greece, a mechanical servant pouring wine in Alexandria, a bronze instrument capable of detecting earthquakes hundreds of miles away in imperial China, a navigation system that could guide armies through blinding fog, and finally a walking mechanical monk inside a Renaissance palace. These inventions appeared in different centuries across different continents, created by cultures that had never met one another. Yet they share a remarkable common thread. Each one reveals engineers thinking far beyond the limits we normally assign to their time. They were not simply building tools. They were exploring the idea that machines could sense, decide, and act. In other words, they were experimenting with the earliest foundations of automation. The deeper we examine these forgotten devices, the clearer it becomes that the human drive to create intelligent machines did not begin in the modern age. It has always been part of our story, waiting quietly beneath the surface of history. Today, we live in a world surrounded by machines that can fly, navigate, sense danger, and even imitate human behavior. It is tempting to believe that these achievements belong entirely to the modern age born from computers and artificial intelligence. Yet the deeper we look into history, the more that certainty begins to fade. Long before electricity, ancient engineers were already experimenting with the same ideas that drive modern robotics, motion perception, and autonomous action. Their tools were simple: wood, bronze, steam springs, and gears. But their imagination was anything but simple. In many ways, the machines we build today are not entirely new inventions. They are echoes of a much older vision, one that proves humanity has always dreamed of giving life to machines. When we look back at these forgotten machines, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Human ingenuity has never belonged to just one era. Long before computers, electricity, or artificial intelligence, brilliant minds were already asking the same questions we ask today. How far can machines extend human capability? And what happens when technology begins to imitate life itself? These ancient inventions remind us that progress is not simply about new tools, but about imagination and responsibility. Every generation inherits powerful ideas from the past, and what we choose to do with them shapes the future. As technology accelerates in our own time, from AI to autonomous systems, the real challenge is not whether we can build extraordinary machines, but whether we can guide them wisely. If this story made you see history differently, take a moment to support the channel. Like the video, share it with someone curious about the hidden side of history, and subscribe for more investigations into the forgotten technologies that shaped our world.